Hey, g'day, it's George again from Down Under, and today I'm going to give you another one of my favorite movies breakdowns, so let's get right into it.
Ma is the boss of the underworld in Korea. He walks like a tiger and is ruthless. Those who provoke him are put into sandbags and directly beaten into bean paste. When he's negotiating with his opponent Arkun, his main power talked out of line and then got slapped in the face. When it comes to his friend, he broke his front teeth off with his bare hand. Such a beast of a man. While he's driving, he was rear-ended. He checks and finds that there's no serious damage and is ready to turn around and leave. Suddenly the killer comes back and stabs him with a knife. He turns around and pushes the killer away. The killer rushes up and wanted to stab him again. He grabs his arm and throws him to the ground. He grabs the killer. The killer stabs him in the chest. In a attempt of desperation, he held onto the knife by his own hands and punches him in the stomach. He throws the killer onto the door of the car and punches him again. The man grabs the killer and throws him into the car. He grabs the sharp knife and stabs the killer fiercely. The killer rolls over and dodges. Ma grabs the killer and stabs him in the chest. The killer feels like he can't win now, so he gets into his car and drives and knocks Ma down. Finally, Ma is sent to the hospital for emergency treatment. His mate arrives, Shin, who thinks the atrocity is from his opponent Kun. Shin, together with his mate, smashes Kun's business to pieces. Meanwhile, the killer goes into the suburb to deal with his wounds. He is upset by the noise from the nearby dogs, and would you believe it, he kills the owner of the dog. In the hospital, Ma tells Shin that the killer is not their opponent, since he cannot feel any sentiments from the killer's knife. News come of the boss of the underworld has been assassinated. FBI Shrey comes to investigate the case, but Ma tells him that he only fell carelessly. Of course, Shrey did not believe this, so he goes to the parking lot to look for Ma's car. He finds that there are signs of struggle on the car, and there is white paint on the back of the car, which is very similar to the serial murder case he had recently investigated. Back at the FBI, the leader tells Shrey to handle only small cases. Shrey is unconvinced. He thinks he can handle the bigger fish. Kun comes to visit Ma in the hospital again. He just wanted to laugh at Ma and claim his losses. Ma asks someone to draw the portrait of the killer and tells Shin to find the killer before the FBI. Meanwhile, the serial killer is still killing innocent people. A truck driver did not go back to celebrate his child's birthday, so he killed the driver out of this reason. But he doesn't know that there was another person in the truck, and to avoid witnesses, he had to kill this innocent person as well. During the struggle, the killer's knife was thrown out of the truck. Ma's mate found the killer's knife and the truck, but the news of Ma's assassination spreads across the territory. His opponent Kun seized the opportunity to seize their lands, and Ma's investors began to stop cooperating. Ma knew that he had to solve this as soon as possible, so he contacted the FBI and told him to be at his place alone. As the FBI arrives, they had a short meeting. They decided to work together to their own advantage. They will look for the killer together, and whoever finds the killer first can deal with him. A lion and a tiger joins hands to hunt. Now this guy talks too much when he's at dinner with Ma, so as expected, he got a couple of slaps to the face. Meanwhile, the FBI is still looking for the killer. Ma also asked Shin to kill his opponent Kun, so that he could take his territory and his businesses. When the FBI went to investigate the death of Kun, the police found that the DNA have more than a dozen people who had been recently killed on the same knife. FBI Shrey immediately knew who did this, so he paid a visit to Ma. Ma admits it directly, but Shrey cannot do anything. After all, they are working together. At Kun's funeral, Ma shows his sadness while drinking, but the killer was also there and stared at Ma in the corner. The killer secretly hands a note to a guy, saying that someone killed his boss using his knife, and that guy immediately understood that it was Ma who killed his boss. Next day, Ma and FBI are looking for evidence in the killer's car, while Pell brings his mates to revenge his boss. It was Rampage, and they were cutting like mad dogs. Someone even used a wrench. Who brings a wrench to a fight? Don't bosses have guns and money? At least bring a gun, otherwise everyone's gonna think you are a mechanic. Anyways, Ma and the FBI are obviously pretty good at fighting, and not your ordinary soldiers, so they took out the bad guys pretty easily. But unfortunately, in self-defense, the FBI stabs Pell to death. As the battle ends, Ma tried to confront Shrey, but he was completely struck. It was never his intention to kill the guy, because he is part of the law. However, Ma upholds his justice and tells him to leave. He said he will deal with it. Back at the headquarters, Shrey was assigned to investigate the kidnapping that just happened. Him and his colleagues do a fairly good job at phone monitoring and set up traps waiting for the murderer. He hides on the rooftop waiting for the killer. Suddenly he finds a man with a hat theory. It's the serial killer. So he starts to chase after the killer, but he doesn't catch him. Suddenly he gets a message from his colleague. It's the killer's residential address. The landlord tells Shrey that the man hardly ever comes back, but would never owe the rent, nor did he touch alcohol. When he enters the room, he finds the room is filled with stench. He finds the killer's diary, a drawer full of sulfuric acid. together with a picture of the killer. Shrey immediately understands why the killer never left any fingerprints. He immediately informs his colleague to send him the recording of the kidnap case. Then he sends the recordings to Ma. Ma confirms that this is the serial killer's voice and the killer has finally surfaced. So they both start calling all the people around them. Two teams are formed to pursue the killer. It turns out that the killer was abused as a child and grew up in an orphanage. At present, he still talks to his mother on the phone every day. Both teams are ready and begins the search. He is the boss of the underworld, and he is killing all of his opponents. But such a ferocious boss unexpectedly also has a soft heart, or maybe just for barely legal schoolgirls. He threw away his smokes because he was making her uncomfortable. Seeing that she needed an umbrella, he was willing to give it to her. And he also encouraged the little girl to study hard. In the evening, when they were all having dinner, everyone is quite harmonious. They're like a big family. But the harmonious scene is broken by a sudden news in an instant. The Preventer killer committed the crime again. Suddenly, he sees that the same umbrella he was given to the student today. Ma is furious. He orders his men to check the place they had searched again. A man reports that he has found trace of the killer, so he and Ma decided to hide and wait for the killer. Suddenly, the killer appears at 2400 hours, but he sensed something was off. It's a trap. The killer drives the car and runs away. Ma and his colleague chase after him. At the crossing, Ma steps on the gas and smashes into the killer's car. But when he opens the door, he finds that the killer had already escaped. Typical. They continue to chase. Xing is unfortunately killed during the process. Ma comes to a KTV, bruised and bleeding. In a private room, he finds something. He punches the door and enters it. He finds the killer hiding inside, and he starts fighting with him. He beats the killer near to death before dragging his prey like a lion away from the KTV. He starts to interrogate the killer, but he won't talk. So like all Koreans do, they slap the victim's face. This thing is actually quite exciting. Each slap is for all the innocent people who died tragically, one by one, as well as all the innocent students. Ma wanted to teach him a lesson and torture the killer before he dies. Finally, he raises his machete, and just as he's about to strike, a car comes crashing in, sending Ma flying. It is Shrey from the FBI who hit him, and just like all interrogation scenes, the FBI does not have sufficient evidence to accuse the killer. The killer has eroded his fingerprints with sulfuric acid to prevent leaving any evidence leading to himself. In court, the victim's family was grieving. With no evidence, it was hard to put the killer in trial. Just then, a man stands up and slowly enters the room. It's the man himself, Boss Ma. He agrees with the FBI Shrey to testify as a witness against the killer, and this was the only solution to put the killer to a death sentence. Ma agreed to Shell's request and decided to show up at court, and in return, he would have to stay in prison with the killer. He produced the evidence that was on his body to show the court, and soon after, the killer was sentenced to jail. Soon after, we see the arrival at the prison, with all the prisoners neatly bowing to the car as Boss Ma enters the prison. He sees the killer reading a book in the corner. "How dare you read a book in my prison? You are going to die." Ma finally catches his prey, and the story climax with the love story between a fierce lion and a baby bear begins. Hope you liked the video. Subscribe for more.